that the last thing anyone would ever expect would be for the Bible to say that the conversation is to have itself regenerated. And to do so in a sense of the creator of the human being involved in that regeneration. Now this is absolutely different because traditional religious philosophy has always involved not the conversation suffering regeneration, reformation, and renewal, but it has always been the human being and whatever natural or unnatural or supernatural aspects of the human being attached to regeneration, resurrection, and renewal, and with the deity involved. But the Bible is a little bit different, and the context of the Bible is a little bit different. We're used to hearing about religions and spiritualities and practices where it is us that is to be us, biologically, naturally, unnaturally, supernaturally, that is to find alleviation by a deity. So it is us that is to experience whatever will and joy the deity has in mind. But in the Bible, the dialogue is a little bit different, a lot of bit different, and that a lot of bit different, trending towards the fact that the human being, while involved, while there, the human being is really not necessarily the subject. The human being is the subject while not being the subject. The conversation of the human being is the subject within the Bible. The conversation is what is to embrace a new heart and a new spirit of mind for the sake of the human being. And thus far, our illustrations have depicted this, and I've taken the time to go through the Bible to let the Bible speak for itself, that we may challenge what we believe we think to know about our spirituality, about our denominational heritage, and about where we believe our thoughts should be when it comes to the Bible and when it comes to the chief figure that we take to be representing the salvation within the Bible. And what I've done is I've illustrated a scheme where we can see what Bible is, but we can see what we have grown accustomed to in the secular religious world. And we can see the difference. To the Bible, and to the mind inspiring the words within the Bible, the main concern is the conversation of the human being. The relationship the human being has with the words within the Bible, and the relationship the human being has, character-wise, devotionally and personally, with its creator, with their creator. And so what we have been learning and what we have been discussing, it is truly weird to hear a philosophy of not the human being resurrecting or regenerating or continuing, but the conversation regenerating, resurrecting, and continuing. This is what the scheme or the philosophy of the scheme within the Bible is. It is a dedication to the conversation of the human being, to the end the human being may recognize the value within that conversation, to recognize the value within their self, to recognize the value within their environment, and to recognize the value of life within that environment, and then to extend outside of that environment for other lives in other environments. It is a complete process of growth, of thought, of feeling, of action, and behavior. And it all stems from the regeneration or the resurrection of our conversation. And so I'm not surprised when I do speak to different people that when I do break these things down, even more than I have thus far, it gets into where it's going, what is the point of this, how is this so separate and so deviating from what I know to be traditionally, and it is just the Bible. It is only giving the Bible as the way that the Bible is and understanding it from its language and from its context, its healing. And so when we look in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we're looking at the events in the life of the main character within them, and the parables that are told, and the different instances and communications. There is an instance where we can actually draw out this principle in the book of Mark. I'm not gonna go through and read the entire instance, but we can remember in the book of Mark an individual who was accustomed to living in tombs and was bound, and says that he had legion inside of him. Book of Mark 5:15. The book of Mark 5:15. The book of Mark, chapter 5 and verse 15, picking out simple verses to illustrate this point. The book of Mark, chapter 5 and verse 15, it says, "And they come to Jesus and see him that was possessed with the devil and had legion, sitting and clothed, in his right mind, and they were afraid." Now I'm pointing this out because this is the result. This is the result of what we have been talking about thus far when it involves the conversation's growth and development. The end result is supposed to be a right mind. The beginning result is a mind clearly not right. This individual, if we're going to make sense of this, if we're going to make sense of this so that it matters in real sense and for real present time, this individual was bound with chains and fetters. Fetters, they're another word for chains. They're shackles, they're bonds. So this individual was chained with something. And whatever he was chained with, it didn't do him any good. It didn't do them any justice. Whatever was shackling this individual tore him apart. And so, instead of it tearing him apart, this individual ended up tearing them apart himself. And so, in the book of Mark 5 and verse 4, jumping up some verses, in the book of Mark in 5 and verse 4, book of Mark chapter 5 and verse 4, Mark chapter 5 and verse 4, it reads, "Because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces, neither could any man tame him." So what we're seeing an individual that had issues. And really, he wasn't, not afraid to acknowledge those issues, because we read that he saw those issues, he saw those chains and shackles, and he himself is the one that destroyed them. He himself is the one that destroyed his own chains and his own shackles. Now we would think that the destruction of what chains us should lead to liberty. We would think that the destruction of what harms our character and that what ties us would lead to our freedom from that experience. But an odd thing happened. This individual, plagued by his own self, due to an experience that he his own self was going through, took that experience, cut that experience in half, no longer abided by that experience, and was left plagued with various streams of thought, killing him worse than before. So we should think that taking an effort to get rid of something in our life is decent. I'm going to change myself. I'm going to better myself. I'm going to better my relationship. I'm going to better how I work. I'm going to better how I envision. I'm going to better how I organize. I'm going to better how I order. I'm going to better how I structure. I'm going to better how I talk. I'm going to better how I write. I'm going to better how I treat you. I'm going to better how I treat me. I'm going to better how I treat my faith. This sounds incredible. And when we're able to say this, bless our hearts. This is something that is not normal to say. But there is an issue. And the issue is that we cannot do anything for ourselves. We may be able to break as far as we can break, but we cannot really get down to the crux, to really get down to the issue, to heal ourselves. Now, when we're reading this story, we're hearing that this individual was possessed with the devil. Now, plainly, the devil is no artificial figure. The devil is no individual outside of this individual. The devil is plainly this individual's mind. This individual's mind, thoughts, and feelings connected. This individual's character was the devil in and of itself. The devil is a symbolic term used to represent the character that plagued the individual. It is a devil because it did no good thing for him. And it was a deceiving agent force, and it was harmful, and it was injurious. The devil in play at this point in time is this individual's mind. Nothing from without this individual harmed him. Everything from within this individual did. This individual was an enemy to his own self, which is odd because he broke away from what he believed was an enemy to his own self, and he was correct. He was correct to break away, to kill those chains. But it just so turns out that there are more to the chains than those chains. When those chains are broken, we still have to deal with the result of us being linked to them for how many months or years we have been linked to them. This was the issue. And we can't, as well as it is to say, I want to better myself, I want to treat you better, I want to treat me better, I want to treat us better, I want to treat life better, as well as it is to say this, we have to understand that we may actually suffer more harm by saying this and by taking on this task alone and without the one that actually created us. Because we don't have it in us, and we were not created to do this alone. As much as we can do that is positive for ourselves, we will not be able to move forward or move on from what we need to move on from if we are relying on self, because self has no intelligence. Our self has no intelligence. Our self needs intelligence, and this is what this story is pointing to. And so in the book of Psalms 68 and verse 6, what is it that these chains are? Psalm 68 and verse 6. Psalm 68 and verse 6, God setteth the solitary in families, he bringeth out those which are bound with chains, but the rebellious dwell in a dry land. So the Bible is letting us know that we have chains, and that it is his intention, it is the living God's intention to bring out the chained individual. So this story is not false. This individual had chains, and the work of the living God was being fulfilled, but it was missing a certain element. Psalm 73, 3 through 9. Psalm 73, verses 3 through 9. Psalm 73, verses 3 through 9. For I was envious at the foolish when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. For there are no bands in their death, for their strength is firm. They are not in trouble as other men, neither are they plagued like other men. Therefore pride compasseth them about as a what? Pride compasseth them about as a chain, violence covereth them as a garment. Their eyes stand out with fatness, they have more than the heart could wish. They are corrupt and speak wickedly concerning oppression. They speak loftily. They set their mouth against the heavens, and their tongue walketh through the earth. Now let's just pay attention here, because this individual was bound with chains and fetters. Now these chains, remember, were in the Bible. We can't take these chains primarily and link them to anything secular. It doesn't work that way. Primarily, being in the Bible, we have to remain in the context of the Bible. The Bible being a book of religion and of being a book of correcting religion, being a book of philosophy, not necessarily of religion, but of correcting religion through philosophy, its philosophy, this individual was bound with religious or spiritual chains. This individual's religious practice spoke against the heavens. It spoke loftily against the living God. It oozed pride. This individual had chains of a spiritual nature. And he saw these chains. He understood that there was a defect in them, and he broke them himself. He broke these chains himself. And breaking them himself, he found more trouble than before. So let's continue learning what these chains, quote unquote, are actually tied to, or what they actually may reference. So looking in the book of Ezekiel chapter 7, verses 22 and 23, the book of Ezekiel chapter 7, verses 22 and 23, Ezekiel 7, verses 22 and 23, my face will I turn also from them, and they shall pollute my secret place. For the robbers shall enter into it and defile it. Make a chain, for the land is full of bloody crimes, and the city is full of violence. So when we're seeing this word chain, it is fair to connect this word chain to crimes of a cruel sort and to violence of a cruel sort. This individual possessed a conversation, a religious conversation, whether adopted, inherited, or cultivated, that was ruining the state of his mind, the state of his being. It was moving him to profess pride. It was moving him to profess a conversation against the heavens. It was moving him to execute crime and violence against his own self and against what he may have possibly believed to be the character of the living God. So turning to the book of Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 3 and 4, what are further these chains? The book of Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 3 and 4, the book of Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 3 and 4, Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 3 and 4 reads, her princes within her are roaring lions. Her judges are evening wolves. They gnaw not the bone till the morrow. Her prophets are light and treacherous persons. Her priests have polluted the sanctuary. They have done violence to the law. Now we may take this law and think the law of Moses, and in the age and in the time that this was, probably, but the individuals that knew the living God's philosophy knew that that law of Moses was not the only law to abide by. This law to abide by, Isaiah 51 and verse 4, a law shall proceed from me, and I will make my judgment to rest for a light of the people. Whether it's David, whether it's Solomon, whether it's Enoch, whether it's Seth, whether it's Shem, whether it's Paul, whether it's John, each of these individuals understood that there is an underlying law or commandment or judgment or doctrine or philosophy within the scriptures. This underlying understanding is what this individual's religious conversation was not acknowledging. Because it was not acknowledging what he knew to be true, he had to take these chains that religiously held him down. And again, we can't link firstly secular. It is firstly the Bible, so it is firstly philosophical or doctrinal, that held him down to the point where he himself had to break these chains in order to do right by himself. And he did, and good for him. But as he did, he didn't have any sort of coding substance. He didn't have any sort of assistance to go along with this effort. This was an effort strictly by self, and because it was an effort strictly by self, his mind and his thoughts were plaguing him. This individual had no context of how to live out his conversation without those chains. Once those chains were gone, good for you. You're no longer being deceived by what you thought religion was, and by what you thought God was, and by what you thought your devotional character was. Good for you. But there's something missing to where now you have to discover, or I should say rediscover, who you actually are, both as a human being and as a devotional being. This is what this individual was missing. He got the job done, but the job didn't take care of him as a devotional being or as a human being. So further, in the book of Isaiah 59 and 13, in the book of Isaiah 59 and 13, just seeing what these chains actually did to this individual. Book of Isaiah 59, 13. Isaiah 59, 13, we have reviewed this verse for what the definition of sin is. In transgressing and lying against the Lord and departing away from our God, speaking oppression and revolt, conceiving and uttering from the heart, words of falsehood. And so when we go back into this story and we reanalyze it and we put all of the pieces together, we can actually understand who this figure was. Step away from the illustration, step away from the colorful language, step away from the added language. There is a real context, and there is a real lesson here. This real lesson is that we have an individual who was plagued spiritually and who was plagued devotionally, not content, and understanding that he should not be content in the practice that he held to God, to the deity. Keep in mind, he's keeping a practice to the deity and he's still not understanding the living God. Knowing that this practice may not have been good for him, Bible tells us that he himself burst those chains asunder and destroyed them himself. We should think victory should be served and good for doing this. But that's not the end of the battle. That appears to be the end of the battle, but the real battle is within. This individual relied for how many years he did on the substance and the stimulus that religious practices gave him. Breaking those asunder, understanding that they were wrong, he was left unwell and he was left undone. Until a voice met him. Until a voice met him, and what this individual heard cleaned out that deviant, that injurious stream of thought, and those various injurious streams of thought. To the point that after this voice came into him not meaning physical, him meaning mental. And we understand that it was mental and not physical because the end result of hearing this voice from one single individual left him sound, sober, and in his right mind. See, what this individual heard was what the prophet in the book of Isaiah 51 and verse 4 stated. A law shall proceed from me, and this law will be a judgment adding light. This individual received within his conversation's heart and mind that light, enlightening his understanding on how to carry himself. Once having this light, he was well. In this story, I'm pointing out because this is the essence of what justification is. Justification is breaking away, an understanding that we need to break away from a religious culture and from religious or traditional religious habits that are doing more injury to us than we would like to admit. When we can admit that and we can separate from that, we have to understand that that growth is not going to occur by ourselves. We can have all of the heart, beautiful. We can have all of the will, beautiful again. We can have all of the desire, and we can do as much as we can do for self. But until we realize that we need to humble ourselves and humbly accept that ourself, if being led into this unjust fashion of devotion, of spirituality, of religion, and has caused us harm, if it can do this, it is not that intelligent. And being not that intelligent, it needs an intelligence. And this is where we come into the new covenant promise. I will write upon them in their heart and in their mind my words and my law. They will be my people, and I will be their God, and they shall know me, from the least to the greatest. None shall say, know the Lord, for they all will know me. This is the new covenant promise. And so what would the Bible have us understand through this story? What would the Bible have us to take away from it? We can take away from it the fact that it is simply written and constructed as a Greek tale. We can take away from it that it is simply a story of stories. We can take away from it the Western theological point of view from it and keep it at that. Or we can look at what is given to us from the perspective of the Bible, and we can analyze it according to that perspective. And we can see that this story is a story pointing to the fact, very real fact, that our conversation has to go through a pattern of growth and a pattern of development. We can see that this pattern of growth and this pattern of development, while it is well for us to will it, we cannot do it alone. Something more needs to be added to our conversation in order for it to have the soundness and the sobriety that it needs. The extra that needs to be added to our action of healing our conversation is a particular voice of commandment, of judgment, a particular law. Romans 8 verse 2, the law of the Spirit of life. This is the philosophy that that individual was crucified for. A philosophy telling that which is of the flesh is flesh and that which is of the Spirit is spirit. A philosophy saying, I know him and keep his saying. A philosophy saying, only those that honor the living God in spirit and in truth will benefit. This is a philosophy saying that everything that we know to be true concerning religion in general and our personal religion and our devotional habits needs to be reconstructed and reordered according to the present promise of the living God's new covenant. That new covenant is a promise tied not primarily to our human being, but firstly tied to our conversation and its heart, its mind, its thoughts, its feelings, its actions, and its behaviors. When we can realize that it is our conversation that is to be revived, as this story is telling us, when we can realize that the devil is our mind, that the devil is us, that the devil is within and not without, when we can realize that the devil is within, and more specifically within the body of our faith, when we can realize this, and when we can break those chains feeding that devil, feeding ourselves, feeding our religious pride, feeding our devotional schisms, we can turn higher, we can become better within, and better to do something that is without us.